Hello, my name is Colin Stein, and I'm the Executive Director of the British Columbia Cycling Coalition, a member-based nonprofit society established in 1998 to support cycling for transportation, and which has evolved into an advocacy organization committed to encouraging enabling legislation, policies, and investments in infrastructure, education, and events, supporting active transportation and the safety of vulnerable road users. Last year, we had the honor of hosting Minister Trevena and other members of the Legislative Assembly, as well as members of the public, for the introduction of Move, Commute, Connect, the province's active transportation strategy. And while we sometimes take the public role of critic on positions and actions of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and more broadly the province, as it relates to issues of tabled legislations and budgets, we are grateful to the provincial government for making very real concerted efforts towards developing smart, evidence-backed policies and delivering positive changes for all British Columbians, especially as it relates to active transportation. To suggest that we can do more is both always true and also the constant challenge across all portfolios, and we recognize that. Everybody wants more, and to suggest that greater investment in walking, cycling, and rolling is a higher priority than similar requests within or without this portfolio would be disingenuous. Similarly, we can't assume that you, members of the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services, Minister James, Premier Horgan, and members of Cabinet, that you just need to see a certain amount of evidence packaged in just the right way in order to feel there's justification for a certain level of spending on active transportation. Whether it's a request to double or triple the current active transportation budget, or hit a certain dollar figure of per capita spending, or even to break out, consolidate, or shuffle the way the money is spent within one ministry or across multiple ministries, we of course have lots of ideas, but we don't assume that a better argument, slick graphs, or a smart presentation is going to shift the budget numbers around. We can and will make these arguments, and we did so in part on June 11th to the committee. We submitted slides to complement this presentation, and there's a lot of written material on our website. And more importantly, you have an incredibly smart team with all the right credentials in the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. The rationale for more spending on active transportation, including legislative reform, policy development and planning, regulation, education, promotion, and engagement, all that has been made. People are saying all the right things, and that includes within government as well. We believe that this has not resulted in the level of funding required to move the dial in active transportation simply because of one thing. Infrastructure is expensive, and we realize that. Despite the fact that dollar for dollar dedicated infrastructure for walking, cycling, and rolling is exponentially less expensive than automobile infrastructure, by a factor of between 10 and 30 times less expensive, it is by far the most expensive area of investment for this area. For example, for the same amount allocated to infrastructure cost sharing in this year's active transportation grant program, about $8.4 million, 50 or 60 people with significant experience and subject matter expertise in active transportation, policy, planning, engineering, and project management could be hired on a full-time basis by the provincial government for such efforts as legislative reform, public education, skills training and development, tourism promotion, economic development, community engagement, industry support. All that could be done. But even this would not make the difference that only infrastructure can. And this has been proven time and time again in cities across BC. This is what the grant program does, and this is where more investment is needed, we feel quite strongly. And so that's where we get to the crux of my message today, not about better evidence or rationale, but about the logical connections that we can and should all make between what we spend and what we get. So two suggestions, basically. One, coming off of the Q&A of our June 11th presentation panel, and that question was around greater investment in active transportation infrastructure that first requires an upfront revenue stream from the taxpayer. That question was asked, or at least that statement was made, and we were asked to address that. The response is simply the irrefutable proof that with very few exceptions, when you build it, people use it. It's true for highway capacity, and if that's what we want our future to look like, people will use it. In spite of our collective and individual economic interests, health goals, and environmental imperatives, if we want more cars and motor vehicle dependency, all we have to do is build for that. However, as we see with such upfront preventative measures around housing, health, addiction, poverty, and social justice, if we want to see those changes or changes in those areas, we need to invest upfront in them. And so the return on investments in dedicated infrastructure for cycling, walking, and rolling will be seen similarly to be providing return on investment for jobs, for GHG emissions reduction, for health and injury prevention, and for the reduction in asset management costs for motor vehicle infrastructure. So rather than expecting the taxpayers or tax revenue to provide that upfront revenue for active transportation infrastructure, we believe first we make the investment and the return will come. 2, there is the unspoken but very real concern that if you build it, there will actually be political risk. That shifting dollars, plans, and delivery partners away from motor vehicle infrastructure, away from highways, interchanges, bridges, and tunnels that we already have, and those that we envision still building, towards active transportation infrastructure we don't yet have, but believe represent the future sustainable society we want, that all that is somehow untenable in the current environment. That doubling down on the messages that we express through Clean BC and Move, Commute, Connect is somehow a bridge too far for British Columbians, and that we should stick to the talk and not actually stick our necks out with the associated spending and measurable goals, walking that talk. Our organization, our coalition members, and our partners firmly believe that those sensitivities are not the result of tuning into the majority of British Columbians, but to the very vocal minority for whom the idea of change threatens their feelings of security. And we understand that, and that's very real. A lot of that comes from lack of knowledge, and perhaps the belief that we as a collective society can't account for the economic and environmental threats we believe we face going forward, the same way that we've adjusted to the health threat facing us thus far in 2020. But we have, and we can, and we need to for the future. We have to face that. What is needed is not more evidence, not more data for everything that would justify more spending on active transportation infrastructure and everything else that comes along with it, but instead more support from the many groups like ours who are pushing for exactly what we've already asked for, whether it's $100 million or $40 per capita or some other figure. What you need is the support and more stories, essentially, about how when cities and regions and the province build for cycling, walking, and rolling, that people come. And how it's not a fringe idea floated by advocacy groups and bogged down by toxic tweets and political ideologies. Instead, that active transportation is integral to BC's future. And that the province's leaders are not just attuned to it. MLAs from all political stripes are committed to walking, cycling, and rolling, and also to active transportation connections to regional transit and innovative public transport solutions that can get us all out of our cars. My organization has suggested to members of Cabinet that tangible policy efforts and investments in new and exciting active transportation projects could be supported by a pan-partisan mobility caucus that takes into account the needs of all regions, all types of people, and all users of our transportation systems, and that this would be better for all British Columbians, including those from industry, where reliance on motor vehicles is not just traditionally part of business, but necessary and integral to our collective economic health. More cycling and walking means better transportation for all. So please let us help you do this, and we can make, we believe, dramatic gains in GHG emissions reductions, deliver real results over the next decade, and hold up BC as a global leader, not just in transportation, but in planning for and investing in the future. The bottom line for us is we passionately believe, as many of your members do, that when you spend more on active transportation, you get more in terms of social, environmental, economic, health, and yes, even political outcomes. We have the evidence as well, and we invite you to talk to us and our coalition members to have that discussion at the right time, and we would say at any time, because we'd be pleased to do so. Thank you for this opportunity.